KPBS On Demand is supported by the National Conflict Resolution Center. Geopolitics, a divisive election year, and strained budgets are all topics that can create tension in the workplace. NCRC can help workplace leaders navigate polarizing issues with the Culture, Communication, and Conflict Certificate. More at ncrconline.com.
Never before have two adults consented to so much. Crimes of Passion, the most talked about movie of the year.
Get ready for some Grindhouse action on this edition of Cinema Junkie. Welcome back to listener-supported KPBS Cinema Junkie. I'm Beth Accomando. In honor of this weekend's Grindathon, which is a mini-marathon of 80s Grindhouse movies conceived of by Michael McQuiggan of Film Out San Diego, I wanted to gather a couple of the other co-presenters who also program films here in San Diego. These are what I consider partners in crime for bringing interesting, innovative programming to San Diego, showing films that we would not have an opportunity to see anywhere else. And I wanted to talk about this weekend's event, which is also co-presented by Femtasia. So today I have Eddie Gurrola of Popcorn Reef and Matt Rotman of Bonkers Cinema. So to start off this conversation, Matt, why don't you tell me what you think Grindhouse is in case there are people out there who don't know?
Well, I think it's easier to start with the simple definition I always give for what is an exploitation film. Usually, I would call it a film that prioritizes sensationalism over artistic intent. And while it's not always the case, they're usually kind of a reflection on cultural upheaval that's taking place during the time. So if you think about the 50s and the 60s, like the teen rebellion films, I mean, that was obviously a reaction to the older generation being frightened by teenagers becoming more free and going against the norms of the prior generation. So then you have films like A Rebel Without a Cause. And then in the 60s and 70s, you have women's liberation, and a lot of that sexual freedom ends up on screen. So you have a lot of sexploitation and pornography. And then, of course, 70s and 80s, crime explodes across urban America. And you get vigilante films and revenge films like Death Wish. And even things like blaxploitation. That's in response to white flight out of urban areas, where you had white people moving out of the cities and you had all these theaters trying to attract an audience. And so they were starting to program towards an urban blacker audience. And so we had an entire exploitation and distribution cycle just geared to making films towards black audiences. So the term Grindhouse, on the other hand, is kind of the catch-all term that we use for an urban theater that specialized in screening exploitation films and pornography. And if you can just visualize 42nd Street in New York City in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, kind of associate it with sex shops and pornography and just general sleaze. But now, 2024, the term Grindhouse and the term exploitation film is just kind of interchangeable.
And Eddie, what do you want to add to that?
What I get out of Grindhouse movies, I'm sure you guys might agree with me, like the take home from it is that these movies are just kind of like out of this world. And what we do at Popcorn Reef specifically is we try to highlight movies that really lean in on the spectacle of what you can get from a film and like that movie magic and kind of this larger than life type of feeling that you get when you're watching them. And a lot of exploitation films, which is why about half of our programming is exploitation and Grindhouse films, they are wild and larger than life in a way that, since there's so much freedom in the filmmaking, all the independent filmmaking, and also just kind of leaning toward trying to appease like base fears and base primal instincts, I think that comes off on the screen. And I think a lot of people that made exploitation movies also, it's fun to watch because they kind of think that the audience wants to see something like really nasty or really absurd. And they kind of, in a certain sense, I guess you'd say they demean the audience by thinking, oh, these guys just want to see a bunch of sex and violence and crazy stuff. And then you get to see like what they really thought of that. And to me, it's hilarious and it's really fun to watch.
Eddie, what would you say is the appeal of Grindhouse to you? Like, how did you get into watching these films and enjoying them?
I got into watching these films and enjoying them because I've always been trying to study film and try to understand structurally what makes a film tick. And these movies, I would equate them kind of to like foreign films in the sense that when you watch a foreign film, to me at least, I learn like maybe about 5 times the amount from watching a foreign film, whether it's good or not, than I would just watching another studio film, as far as seeing what a movie can be and kind of opening my eyes to what you could possibly grab from something. And I would say most exploitation films, especially again, since they were made independently and outside the studio system, can give you just like a bigger perspective on what you can really achieve with the form.
And Matt, what was the appeal to you for Grindhouse films?
Well, I'm basically going to piggyback off of Eddie, but I think a lot of the joy and certainly a lot of the mystique comes from just how Grindhouse films operate outside the Hollywood system. I mean, they've traditionally had different theaters, different distributors, different genres than you're going to see in mainstream cinemas. It has a different kind of flavor. There's always been a kind of a risk and an adventure associated with watching one. You're just always thinking, like, where did this come from? Like, what mind produced this? And there's a joy in that. I also think, too, like, we as a culture have built up these intellectual barriers to avoid seeing these kind of things. You know, we say it's too violent or too sleazy or too cheap. But at the end of the day, the exploitation film, it wants to engage with you. Like, it's designed to. It's, by definition, it's meant to latch on to that lizard part of your brain and just feed off the baser instincts via sensationalism. It's also a safe place to experience very uncomfortable feelings. Like, I mean, right now I'm writing a book about revenge cinema, and revenge cinema is like one of the hallmark staples of exploitation cinema. It's so popular that it bleeds over to mainstream cinema all the time, you know, like John Wick. Basically because there's this universal desire for vengeance. One time, my wife's car got broken into and all her stuff got stolen, and I just remember at the time feeling the sense of violation and the sense of rage, and I really just wanted to be Charles Bronson in Death Wish. And luckily, I'm an emotionally stable person, and I don't want to harm anybody, and I think we have these guardrails set up in society to prevent things like that from happening, but we don't have that in art, and we don't have that in film, and so the revenge film serves that purpose. So, like, sure, it's reactionary, but it's uncomfortable, but it's very human.
Eddie, you are one of the co-sponsors for this Grindathon. So tell us what that's going to be about.
Yeah, so Michael came to all of us, actually, and asked if we wanted to participate in this 80s LA Sleaze-a-thon, really, I guess is maybe an alternate title for this. And a lot of these movies are from the early 80s, and they depict, well, we think at least, I wasn't around during the early 80s in LA, but what we think was going on like on Hollywood and Sunset Boulevard in those times, where there was a lot of prostitution, a lot of gang stuff, and just a general kind of similar to like what Matt was talking about with the 42nd Street. It was the version of that on the West Coast where I guess anything went on the streets and you could kind of go and explore your crazier side. And so Vice Squad has been a favorite of mine for a really long time. I caught it on cable a long time ago, even probably one of the first exploitation movies I ever saw without even really knowing much about exploitation.
Hollywood, the dream and the nightmare.
That's one of the films we're going to be showing. Wings Hauser, who's an incredible actor, and he hasn't really gotten his place in the Hall of Fame, I think, in acting. But this guy, you know, he is known for just playing a complete maniac in films, and this is arguably like a signature role. He plays a pimp named Ramrod in this movie.
Let me see a warrant right now, boy.
Warrants? We don't need no stinking warrants because we're holding them in our right hands. Buffalo Brass.
Check the bedroom. Put your hands on your head. Put your hands on your head.
Hey, cop, come on, shoot.
Hooker like snitches on him basically, and then he just tears up the streets, murdering people and doing a whole bunch of stuff. I actually got to see him speak over up at Cinematic Void in LA earlier this year. He described the film when he was speaking during the Q&A with Jim Branscombe as Jaws on land, with him being Jaws. And I think that's an accurate description of Vice Squad. We're also going to be showing Class of 1984, which is a little bit of a different flavor, but it's about a school teacher played by Perry King who's trying to get his class together in high school, and these guys keep attacking him and basically start threatening to kill him. And, it's all about, as Matt was alluding to too, there was a lot of crime on the streets and what's wrong with everybody right now. And it leans into those desires.
Class of 1984. Their only goal is power.
I run this school, man.
Their only law is survival.
If you want to survive around here, you have got to learn to look the other way.
Their only allegiance is to themselves.
Other film, Crimes of Passion. I think I'm gonna let Matt take the reins on that one.
There are no secrets in the dark. There is no act that cannot be committed. In Women in Love, he crossed forbidden boundaries. In Altered States, he explored the unknown powers of the mind. Now he explores the most provocative power of all. A woman who lives in two worlds. A man who must lose himself to possess her.
So, yes, the Ken Russell film in this Grindhouse marathon.
Yeah, I think this is perfect in the lineup of the three, because if we think about exploitation or Grindhouse, we're always talking about the titillation and the battle between sex and violence. And so while Class of 1984 certainly delivers the goods on the violence, and Vice Squad, the third film showing, definitely delivers the combination of the two, definitely violence as we see it towards sex workers. Ken Russell is right there in the middle, just delivering the most pervy film we can think of, and the most Ken Russell way that we can think of. And if you're not familiar with who Ken Russell is, he's certainly notorious for directing the Devil's art house sort of exploitation film, where he really combines like all things like sexuality, religion, and repression. And those are all things that he combines for Crimes of Passion here. Crimes of Passion is also famous for Kathleen Turner doing a really risque role coming right off the heels of Romancing the Stone. So it was a very risky role for her. It pays off. She's really good in it. And it also has Anthony Perkins, so Norman Bates himself, who plays a very psychotic reverend. And so it's a film I love. I'm so happy Michael's showing it, and I'm so happy to be a co-presenter.
And as I mentioned, both of you program films on a regular basis. Eddie, talk about the venues that you use, especially, I love your description of this, but you call one of your venues the IMAX of Grindhouse. So tell us which one that is.
Yeah, so we've been working with Jeff Cotta downtown at the 10th Avenue Arts Center over in East Village, right by the Hodads, if you guys have ever been over there. And we've been using the main stage as a performing arts center, but we've been rolling a giant screen in there that was kind of a homemade screen, but it's the way it's positioned with the seating, and we have stadium seating there. It puts you right in the screen, almost like you're floating in the screen. And the idea behind a lot of the shows we've been doing there is to give films that you would have never been able to see theatrically ever, even in the 80s or the 70s or whenever they came out, like a larger than life experience, and can't get this at home. So we kicked things off this year by showing Stripped to Kill.
Stripped to Kill. A maniac is killing strippers.
Great, a stripper. How are they gonna keep this quiet?
Detective Sheehan has the only weapon that can stop him. Her body.
You'll never see Stripped to Kill in a theater anywhere, but you'll definitely never see Stripped to Kill like while you're like floating in the middle of a screen. And so it's really a one-of-a-kind experience. We had a lot of folks out recently when we did a cannibal double feature. We showed Emmanuel and the Last Cannibals by Joe D'Amato, which is almost bordering on softcore pornography, but it's also a cannibal movie. And then we showed Dr. Butcher MD, which is kind of a staple of the New York Grindhouse circuit in the early 80s. And it was really fun to have a lot of San Diegans come out here. And actually, I think most people hadn't seen either of those films before, but to see it with a crowd and to be uncomfortable and to, am I supposed to laugh at this, or am I supposed to get the hell out of this theater? Like, that's kind of, what we're trying to go for when we show these films over there. And I'm excited about everything we're doing over there because it's pretty fun.
And what titles do you have coming up?
So we also show films over at the Adams Avenue Theater, which is in Normal Heights, and it's recently renovated. It's a concert venue, but we pack it down into a movie house. And we're showing Con Air next week on the 18th of June over there. And that's the other side of Popcorn Reef is, again, it's like movie magic, and that's what we're kind of aiming for here. And our next double feature for Grindhouse is going to be in July. We haven't confirmed everything yet, but I know that I might be showing the movie Hot Moves, the early 80s sexploitation film. I think that might be something. We're also going to be showing The People's Joker, which I know you guys had a run at with the Digital Gym recently. We're going to be doing the new thing called One Night Only, where we're trying to like spectacleize and make a big deal, just like with these other movies, for movies that are new, that are kind of keeping that spirit of everything alive, that have been kind of making their way through the film circuit, film festival circuit, or whatever you will.
And Matt, you run something called Bonkers Half-Assed Midnights, because we're in San Diego and these start at 10. So what do you have coming up next for that?
Our next screening is actually going to be next Saturday, June 22nd, and it is at 10 p.m. And we are showing the long-lost exploitation film Hollywood 90028.
This is the timely suspense story of the year. Filmed in the most sex-oriented locale in the world, Hollywood 90028. This is the story of the thousands of pretty young girls who come to Hollywood to find stardom and find instead they have to survive any way they can.
It's a film that's ostensibly about an Indiana transplant moving to LA to make it big in Hollywood. Things aren't going well. He gets stuck shooting pornography, and it's really just prior to Taxi Driver, a film about alienation and disillusionment and what that does to a person in an urban environment. And it's directed by Christina Hornisher, which is her sole film. And it's just disappointing we didn't get more films by her. I don't know how overall to describe the film. I can call it art house, but that might turn away some people wanting Grindhouse. Or I could call it Grindhouse, but that might turn away people wanting art house. But in reality, all I can say, it's one of the best independent films of the 1970s. And that really kind of gets to like the finicky nature of the exploitation film. Remember, I defined exploitation as a prioritization of sensationalism over artistic intent, and Hollywood 90028 is 100% an artistic endeavor. But it's just like due to its like subject matter and financing, it's basically its only home when it was released was through the Grindhouse circuit. So basically the mainstream didn't take it seriously, and it was kind of lost with time until Daily Grindhouse just did a new 4K restoration of it. It looks beautiful. We also have an additional perk in that the star of Hollywood 90028 will be in attendance, Christopher Augustine, and he's going to be available after the film. We will have a short Q&A, and you can ask him anything you want.
And since we're talking about Grindhouse, we recently lost someone who is kind of like the most iconic probably figure in Grindhouse cinema and like one of its pillars, which was Roger Corman. And he gave so many filmmakers their start. So tell us a little bit about why Roger Corman was so important to Grindhouse and to filmmaking in general.
I mean, it's really hard to even put into words how much like he's influenced like what we've been trying to do at Popcorn Reef. And when he passed away, it was like, oh, should we do a tribute show? We ended up doing one, but it was hard because the whole thing is a tribute to Roger Corman every time. And that exceeds past the 70s and the 80s Grindhouse films. And back, he did a lot of stuff in the 60s, which I guess defined early exploitation. I wouldn't say he was as like exploitative in those films, but maybe for the time it was pushing some boundaries. But really, I think a lot of the films from the 90s and even today, the elements of even just like car chases and like explosions and all that type of stuff, and monsters, and everything is Roger Corman based with the sensationalism of movies today. And I can't say enough about how much he influenced not only exploitation films and showed. The other thing was he was all about making money as well. But he gave auteurs a chance to make a movie however they wanted to, and where they financed the film. And hey, you do whatever the hell you want as long as we get some violence and some TNA in it as well. I think the blending of those two things together might have been a little bit of an accident at the time, but they make for very entertaining and very politically charged or statement type things. When they're good, they come together, and it's something unlike what you'd see anywhere today. And I mean, I wish movies had those types of motivations today, because you'd see a lot more of what people really want, as opposed to, I think nowadays, a lot of independent films that like come through the film festival circuit aren't really thinking of it in terms of, this is a commercial product and this is something that we need to make entertaining for an audience. And that then you end up lacking something, which Roger Corman kind of melded those two together.
Matt, do you want to add anything?
Well, he covered it pretty well, so I'm just going to add something very personal. I'll forever love Roger Corman just because he discovered Pam Grier. So.
All right. Well, I want to thank you both very much for talking about something I really love. And Grindathon is going to be this weekend, and Popcorn Reef and Bonkers Half-Assed Midnight continue on through the year. So thank you both very much.
Thank you for having us, Beth.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, that wraps up another edition of KPBS listener-supported Cinema Junkie. If you enjoy the podcast, then please share it with a friend, because your recommendation is the best way to build an addicted audience. You can also help by leaving a review. Till our next Film Fix, I'm Beth Accomando, your resident cinema junkie.